Welcome to MD International Studies online course. My name is Sarina, and today we are going to be discussing one of the macromolecules, carbohydrates. Before we go on, as I have always mentioned, any words that you see in bold are test-worthy words that you should know and be familiar with. And any words that are italicized are words that have been mentioned, keywords that have been mentioned in previous lectures. So if you're not familiar with them, I would go back and either look at those lectures that pertain to those keywords. So let's jump in. An overview for what we're going to be speaking about today. We're going to be talking about the 4 different macromolecules of the body. We're going to be discussing specifically today the macromolecule carbohydrate, its structure and function, monosaccharides, which are actually the building blocks of carbohydrates. We're going to specifically talk about fructose and glucose and the differences between them. We're then going to talk about glucose isomers, the role of glucose in the body, which is more of a biology slide, disaccharides, which are two monosaccharides, but we'll get there, and polysaccharides, and some examples, glycogen, starch, and cellulose. So let's get started. Macromolecules. So I like to start from a larger picture to understand the smaller picture. So first, we have an organism, a human being, and the human being can be broken down into different organ systems. So here we have the organ system, the digestive system. We have the stomach, we have the small intestines, these little pink squiggles. We have the large intestine. And if we pluck one organ out, let's say the stomach here, this organ, the stomach is composed of tissues. And tissues are composed of cells that are all together doing different jobs, but for the most part, that's what you need to know. And cells are composed of molecules. And we have 4 major macromolecules that compose cell. So as I said, organisms have organs that are built from tissues, which are composed of cells, which are made from, you got it, macromolecules. So macromolecules are a large class of molecules that are important biologically. They're involved in all the structures and processes of the cell and the organism. Macromolecules can also be called polymers, which are many molecules stringed together. And they are built by adding or subtracting monomers, which is a single molecule. Now, the way I like to think about this, because there's a lot of terminology and sometimes terminology can be confusing, but let me get my pen out here. Excuse me. Okay. So, macromolecules. So macro M. Alrighty. So macromolecules are another name for them are polymers. And polymers are created of monomers. So a monomer, the way I like to think about it is monomers are like a bead on a necklace. And polymers are many beads strung together to make a necklace. So, as I said, our bead on our necklace is our monomer. And the many beads on the necklace is our polymer, or our macromolecule. Sorry there. And so many beads on a necklace will create a polymer, and the building block of our polymers are monomers, this single bead. Let's go back now. Great. So our polymers, our necklace of beads, can be made by our monomers, our single monomers. And the way that this is done is either through a condensation or hydrolysis reaction. So a condensation reaction would be the removal of H2O. So for example, if we had, as I mentioned, our 2 beads, and we want to bring them together to make a necklace. Imagine that hanging off of one of these beads is a hydrogen atom, And hanging off one of these other beads is a hydroxy group. So in order to form the necklace, the two of them will be removed from the equation to form the removal. This is a condensation reaction, the removal of H2O. And together they will form the necklace. So that's an example of building polymers, of stringing the necklace with beads, and that's the use of the removal of water. And hydrolysis is if we want to break the polymer down into its monomers. So, for example, we have our necklace, we have our string of monomers, our polymer, and in order to break it, we would have to add water. So we would add H2O, and then it would break into, like I said before, a bead with a hydrogen group and a bead with a hydroxy group, or a monomer with hydroxy group. All right, that's just, so again, the way we like to think about this is, sorry, I'm trying to, excuse me there. Just want to erase this stuff so we can see. So again, macromolecules are also known as polymers, which are strings of molecules that are created by adding or subtracting monomers, the building blocks of macromolecules, which is a single molecule, and that can be done by condensation, the removal of water, or hydrolysis by the addition of water. So the four types of macromolecules that we need to know are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And today specifically, we'll be speaking about carbohydrates. So, and this is just a nice picture of the different types of macromolecules. We have carbohydrates down here, which are like example, our bread, our sugars, proteins, which is a piece of meat here, our lipids, which are fats, this is a piece of cheese, and nucleic acids and eggs. And so specifically today, we're going to be speaking about our carbohydrates and their building blocks, the monosaccharide. And some examples, glycogen, starch, and cellulose are polymers. So carbohydrates, they're also known as sugars. And their structure, they are organic compounds that are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in the ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. So CH2O would be an example of the ratio of 1 to 2 to 1, meaning if there's one carbon, there will always be 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. And carbohydrates contain one of the following functional groups. Now, if you're not familiar with these functional groups, please go back and watch the lectures on functional groups in organic chemistry. So, carbohydrates will either contain an aldehyde group, which is a carbonyl group located at the end of the carbon skeleton, which is over here. This is our aldehyde. This is our aldehyde group, or a ketone group, which is an internal carbonyl group. And here are 2 examples. So for example, let's start with the 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, the structure of the carbohydrate. So right now, if we're looking at this left molecule, this has 1 carbon, 2, 3, sorry, I don't know if you see my pointer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 6 carbons. Therefore, we should expect to have what? 12 hydrogens. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we would have also 6 oxygens, which I guarantee you are there. And in terms of functional groups, tell me the difference between these 2 groups. Well, what do we see here? This is a terminal carbonyl group. Therefore, this is an aldehyde. And this group, this molecule over here has an internal carbonyl group. So this is actually a ketone group. And what we'll discuss soon is that the molecule that has the aldehyde group is actually glucose, and the molecule with the ketone group is fructose. But we'll get there. So continuation of the structure of our carbohydrate. So we said it has a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio in regards to carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and that it always has one of 2 functional groups, either an aldehyde group or a ketone group. So as briefly mentioned, the monomers, the building blocks of carbohydrates, remember, monomers are needed to build polymers, which are a macromolecule. The building blocks of carbohydrates are known as monosaccharides. So our bead on our necklace is in the carbohydrates macromolecules are known as monosaccharides. And one of the most important ones being glucose, which we will discuss later. And there is a picture of it in both its ring formation and linear formation. Two monosaccharides linked together will form a disaccharide, di meaning two, so two beads on a chain will be a disaccharide. Two monomers, two monosaccharides together will make a disaccharide, while many linked together will form a polysaccharide, just like our polymer. Just this polysaccharide is specifically, it gives us a specifics about carbohydrates. So polymers is a broad word for any macromolecule, but polysaccharide is a polymer of carbohydrates. And how do these beads come together to form a necklace? How do these monomers come together to form a polymer? And the special bond between these beads, between these monomers, is known as a glycosidic linkage. And as mentioned earlier, when monomers form polymers, they do this through a condensation reaction, through the loss of H2O, the loss of water. And specifically with carbohydrates, this reaction is, as we said, they will form a glycosidic linkage, and this reaction is condensation. And the way it's done is that we take one monomer, this glucose monomer that you see down here. It has an OH group hanging off its carbon number 1. Here is carbon 1, right here. And it reacts with the carbon number 4 of another glucose monomer, and H2O is removed. And here we have our glycosidic linkage with a central oxygen atom. If you don't understand how the bonding mechanisms work and how this form, please look back to our earlier organic chemistry lectures to explain the way bonds form and the way molecules interact with each other in forming a molecule. And we spoke about the structure of carbohydrates. So we said that we have the ratio, we have the functional groups, the building blocks are monosaccharides, they can form disaccharides, polysaccharides through a glycosidic linkage, and its function, the main function of carbohydrates is used for energy storage and for production. As we said, carbohydrates are sugars, we need them for energy. Now, before we move on, as mentioned, the monomer, the bead on the chain to create the necklace, is the monosaccharide. So now we're going to discuss some features of the monosaccharide. So as mentioned, the monomers or building blocks of carbohydrates are monosaccharides. Some examples are fructose, glucose, galactose, and mannose. And specifically, we're going to talk about